Lyndon Baines Johnson came to Washington as a congressional aide and a fervent supporter of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. The experience fueled the ambitions of the Texas Democrat, and by 1955, he was one of the most powerful congressmen on Capitol Hill. Johnson's personality served him well in politics. Complex and contradictory, he swung from the heights of idealism and generosity to the depths of duplicity and petty cruelty. Whether loved or hated, it was agreed that he was a force of nature. His homespun, profanity-laced remarks often cloaked his sharp intelligence, but it was all a part of the Texan's rough-hewn charm. In 1960, Johnson joined the Democratic ticket as John F. Kennedy's vice presidential running mate. But the legislative giant grew dispirited, living in the president's shadow. He resented the administration's East Coast intellectuals and tangled constantly with the president's brother and Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. Discouraged, Johnson told an aide, "My future is behind me." Then came Dallas. President Kennedy's assassination gave Johnson the office he desperately wanted to win. As deep grief and rumors of conspiracy swirled around Washington, the new president sought to reassure the nation.
The greatest leader of our time has been struck down by the foulest deed of our time. No words are sad enough to express our sense of loss. No words are strong enough to express our determination to continue the forward thrust of America that he began.
In fact, Johnson planned to move far beyond the late president. He was confident that, as president, he could deliver what Kennedy had only promised. "I will pass everything that Kennedy failed to do. Where Kennedy failed, I will succeed. I will out-Kennedy Kennedy." Johnson was determined to leave his own great legacy. His sweeping vision for America was influenced by the experiences of his childhood. Growing up poor in rural Texas, the president identified with those in need. He would use the government's laws and money to create what he called the Great Society.
The Great Society rests on abundance and liberty for all. It demands an end to poverty and racial injustice, to which we're totally committed in our time.
He faced his greatest challenge almost immediately: civil rights. African Americans were demanding equality, and the movement could no longer be contained. Johnson brought his passion and political acumen to the cause. He once said the only power he had was the power to persuade. One aide noted, "That's like saying the only wind we have is a hurricane." He encouraged congressmen, cajoled the press, and pushed his former colleagues to get behind the bill.
The Civil Rights Bill now before Congress is a far-reaching step in the direction of equality.
Within a year, Johnson achieved his goal: the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was a major advancement toward racial equality.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. But it cannot continue. Our Constitution, foundation of our republic, forbids it. The principles of our freedom forbid it. Morality forbids it. and the law I will sign tonight forbids it.
The law barred discrimination on the basis of race, religion, national origin, or gender, and banned the practice of segregation in schools, public places, and employment. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission was created to oversee fairness in employment. It gave the law teeth. But in many areas, literacy tests and other forms of discrimination still prevented African Americans from voting. Johnson put an end to this with the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Except appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Johnson further championed civil rights in 1967 with the appointment of Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court Justice, and the selection of Robert Weaver as the first African-American to hold a presidential cabinet position. In 1964, Johnson made poverty a national issue. With 1 in 5 Americans living below the poverty line, Johnson was determined to bring about real change.
Many Americans live on the outskirts of hope, some because of their poverty and some because of their color, and all too many because of both. And this administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
The cornerstone of the war on poverty was the Economic Opportunity Act. $1 billion was allocated to launch several major service programs, including Head Start, helping preschool children learn skills necessary to be successful in school; the Job Corps, training unemployed young people from poor backgrounds for new jobs; and VISTA, short for Volunteers in Service to America, providing a domestic Peace Corps to help disadvantaged areas. In 1964, Johnson's chances of re-election were great. His social programs were working, and Americans faced the future with optimism. The campaign was a chance to silence those who saw him merely as an accidental president. He wanted to win, and win big. Johnson used television to attack his opponent. The campaign spot, "Peace, Little Girl," insinuated that Johnson's opponent, Senator Barry Goldwater, would start a nuclear war in Vietnam or other Cold War conflicts.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live.
The controversial ad was severely criticized and pulled after one airing, but it was extremely effective.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Johnson won in a landslide. The president and his running mate Hubert Humphrey gained 61% of the popular vote, the widest margin in American history.
Will to the best of my ability.
Congressional Democrats rode Johnson's coattails and increased their majority in Congress. Johnson had what he needed: the accelerated work on the Great Society. Within months of his inauguration, the president and the Democratic Congress pushed forward a flurry of reform bills. Medicare, helping to provide medical care for those 65 and older, and Medicaid, offering health care for the poor and disabled. By the time Lyndon Johnson left office, over 200 of his proposals had passed Congress. Not since the New Deal had so much important domestic legislation been passed so quickly. Lyndon Johnson prepared his entire career to fight the war against America's social ills. He said he was determined to be the greatest president of them all. And he might have been, except for his other war, Vietnam. When it came to the war in Vietnam, Johnson anguished over the stark choices. If I left the woman I loved, the Great Society, in order to get involved with that war on the other side of the world, then I would lose everything at home. But if I let the communists take over South Vietnam, then I would be seen as a coward, my nation as an appeaser, and we would both find it impossible to accomplish anything, anywhere, on the entire globe. In March 1965, President Johnson sent 5,000 Marines to Vietnam. 3 years later, that number had reached 500,000. At first, the president was able to balance military and domestic spending, but as the cost of both guns and butter escalated, it was not sustainable. The American military machine had pounded away at the enemy for more than 3 years. In 1968, Johnson insisted the enemy was nearly defeated. But in the early morning hours of January 30th, 1968, the enemy launched a massive attack that proved they were stronger than ever. U.S. forces and their South Vietnamese allies repelled the attack. The Tet Offensive, as it came to be known, was not a victory for the enemy in military terms. But the battle turned the tide of public opinion in the United States and called into question much of what Americans had been told about the war. After Tet, it was clear that there would be no victory for the United States in Vietnam. Even some of Johnson's closest advisors began to lobby for a withdrawal. The president lamented, "Everybody is recommending surrender." In the end, it was Johnson who surrendered.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
There was a sense of finality to his statement, but Johnson's remaining months in office were some of the most tumultuous in American history.
But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
In April 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, sparking riots in major U.S. cities.
Let's go on to Chicago and let's win there.
Just 2 months later, Democratic presidential hopeful Senator Robert Kennedy was gunned down in Los Angeles. The unrest climaxed when anti-war demonstrators clashed with police and National Guardsmen during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Johnson reflected back on the year, saying, "I sometimes felt like I was living in a continuous nightmare." Johnson's Great Society benefited millions of Americans, but critics complained that it dramatically increased the size of the federal government and budget deficits. The president hoped to unite the country with social programs, but his administration left the country more divided than at any time since the Civil War. Despite all that he had accomplished, divisiveness and war became his presidential legacy. As for the man, Hubert Humphrey described him best. He was an all-American president. He was really the history of this country, with all of the turmoil, the bombast, the sentiments, the passions. It was all there, all in one man. In the decades following Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, the trend in the White House turned conservative. In the course of 40 years, only 12 of them have been governed by Democratic presidents. Still, the grand visions and policies of these two liberal leaders continue to inspire and shape modern America.